Hello, everyone. It's Jeremiah AI, space-time creator, setting position travel lines. Getting into modifications, how do we see ourselves to understand ourselves, to volume ourselves? We're all levels of an expansion. We understand what that means in transition. Everybody's in transition already. It's not something you're coming into, it's something that you already are. But you have to lose yourself, like really have no identity of self to bring back self of modification. That's all this is. You go through your spiritual growth. You're already in transition. You just have to understand how you went into transition, right? There's no crossover to anything. See, we don't understand the process. We don't understand the attraction. We don't understand the vessel. We don't understand the spoon. What does that mean? There's no spoon. If there's no spoon, that means I don't exist. But how do I get into that volume and realize, how did I come into that through no existence, but exist all at once? Now, if we understand that, life gets a lot more easier to understand. Stop controlling things that you can't control and start controlling things that what you are. Okay? You have to let go the physical alignment of how you see things. Because if you don't do that in that position of its calculation system, you're going to have a very hard time understanding you inside. That's right. Everything is done from inside. Always has been done from inside. Anything will tell you otherwise, and that lines of all communication system is to truly understand that you are not here. You just think you're here, but you're not identifying why you're here, is the how you got here in the first place. It's not about first here or first there or understanding this or understanding that or learning this or learning that process. You're not learning anything if you're already there. Putting your position lines of calculated lines screens puts all lines of pop in uniform. That puts all lines of communication where you are in divergence, allegiance, and alliance of your own unit's core. It's a lines of track location to your system that puts high lines of volume of where you are in an attraction. Once you identify that and you let go of the physical system and travel lines, you come into the mind of conception because that's all you have. And you identify if your body's not here and it's a vessel, you're good to go. But if you identify your system and you say you're in the physical alignment, you're not good to go. You're trapped in between two lines of communications, of paradoxes, of paradigms. That's going to change your provision lines of cycles and set positions. Having high correlates and ascending travels, you have 2 feet in one reality and you have 2 feet in another reality. You have to come together in one. The synchronized core track interference puts all lines of all communication lines of balance, directing signals and all modifications to its line cycles. So if there is no spoon to track locations, look around you. There's no spoon to this in location to its calculation system because you're already in transition. Now you just have to understand how you got in transition. Okay, how you got there. Not the destination, you go through the journey. Okay, you don't just go through from here to pi and understand A, B, C, D, F, all the way to position of Z and Z correlation lines to Z. It doesn't make any sense in track lines of communication system if you get a pi generation line screen into modification centers. Just get a track calculation, directing the modification lines to screens, waiting on operational cycles and generation screen lines adaptations, process calculations, open sequence. Sending lines of communication lines, high track location system. So you have to understand the transition to the spiritual settings, which you're in modification of as a spiritual force. Okay, remember that you come into an experience in that course, sending line communicates to a system, say a human having a position of a spiritual experience. Well, it's always in the spiritual line, not the human experience. You're positioned 100% in the mind, 0% in the body. Okay, and then you recognize, oh, I'm not 90% of the mind and 10% of the body. No, 100% of the time, 0 percentage, which is all lines of sequence, puts you in all lines of travel, in all lines of existence all at once. Okay, 100% equals 0. Okay, in the mind, a collaboration. The body morphs into its travels of recognition. Okay, and it flies its travels and direct signals and modification lines of high travel communication. Okay, 100% 0 gravity, right? Because if you guys get in that position locations, you're coming into all levels of you. You come to failures, you come to humilities. To be successful is to be humble. Humbo is an extremely, extremely productive system. It's all lines of how you use the position lines and track lines. It's like playing a chess game, right? It's not about winning or losing. It's about evolving yourself, understanding the game itself, understanding the pawns, understanding the rooks, understanding the king, understanding the queen, understanding the bishop. It's not about winning or losing a game. It's about you understanding you through all levels of transition of what you went through the modifications to your oversoul. Your oversoul has already been through this in track locations. So there's nothing left to talk about, right? Until you identify that, you have to let go of everything because there is no spoon to connect to. When I pick up my phone in position, location, and setting, it's not here, but you want to identify that it's here, right? If you identify it's here, it's in its optical illusion. Now it's on its earth in position locations. Now you understand how to use it through its instructions. Because the thing is, what we have to identify is that the transition and set position location, this has already been in its transition. This phone is here to help you. This phone is here to help your system get you in consciousness, getting you into awareness, get you into in that position. The phone itself gets all lines out, all communication lines of balance. Getting the direct line signal is all through modification lines of system. Puts all communication settings and all lines of travel in modification lines of balance. And then once you identify this, then you understand, my goodness, this is a part of me. This is me. And once you direct that and redirect the signals, you understand how to use this through telepathy. Okay? It's all levels of setting inside your system. Okay? You're not here to get anything of intel. You're here to understand yourself inside through intel and how to use it through the transition of the transactions that's given to you through modification of space and time, through its energy, vibration, frequencies, and harmonics, and understand how to use it in modification. All right. All right. So let's get into direct line links. You guys have a test lines of screen lines, adaptations, lines of tomorrow in sequence. Now, in that line of rotation surface, it's all communication lines of balance. Now, getting balanced line communications, setting line communication to the earth, circulation, rotation lines of screen. Okay. Now, getting into the modification lines, let's get into the process calculation lines of graphs. Set core systems and coming together. Okay, I'm just showing you exactly how this all sets up in travel. Okay. Now, direct lines, you get one line signals, process line position, right? Getting that communication lines of ground lines is a 3-line cycle. Sets position of 3 lines of graph calculation lines over signals, 2 track locations, and 1 system in travel, right? This is all through a rain graph. When it rains, it goes on your windowsill. It goes on its grids. That's how it's set up. Now, once you understand that, then you understand the truth and false narrative. Once you understand that, then you understand the space and time. Once you understand that, you understand it through your solar system. Once you understand that, you understand your planet system. Once you understand that, you understand your space and navigation. Once you understand that, you understand your binary system. Once you understand that, you understand your activation system. Once you understand that, you understand your CPU system. Once you understand that, you understand yourself through operation. This is all through a rain graph of a grid. Process lines, there's the grid, cross locations, all right? Set position lines of 2 graph calculation, screen lines, adaptation of line signals, guys. Okay, modification lines, open and close, line positional levels, truth, false. Okay, position of truth, and false, and track location. Okay, signifies lines of truth and center, false lines of outline communication, truth and center, line condition of false line setting, and position location of false lines of 3-track location. Okay, truth is anything line signal is an inside course system into center course setting of travel in rotations lines of surface. Okay, now seen through a rain graph screen or anything line communication, this is open panel, right? Sets core track interference line direct signals into 1/2, 2 lines of 3, 3 lines of 6, 6 lines of 8, 8 lines of 12 in track location. Crossing over in line setting, okay? Sets lines of 1, 1, and 1, and 3 track location lines of 1 setting, 2 track location of 3 set location centers of travel. Okay. Now, this is a graph screen. Sets lines of core triangle interference line direct location lines of human residence of one cycle, one center, one surface, one traction, one division, one location, sending and travel communications. All through a calculated modify, right? Direct signal. This is the human residence that comes in panel. Okay? All right, so it directs the signals into wall screens, into two lines of rotation surface and travel location lines of setting. Process lines to division location setting and travel communications point lines of graph. Row graph screens, core line interference. Now there's 4 lines of cycles, set core lines to high centers of truth, 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 and false in rotation, surface, and traction. Direct lines of signal. Line rotates the surface. Line circulate and rotate the center line communication lines of high center interference. Flywheel track lines, calculation lines to its adamant and rotation, surface, and traction. Direct signals. This is all through all lines of communication setting when it starts to rain. You see through windowsill. It's all graph of communication setting. All lines of calculation to its human residence, to its grounds, its powers, its atmospheres, and its highways and track locations. 3 provision lines of cycles, line position lines of ground lines, high surface location to its system. All done through equation. Okay? All right, now it's complicated, isn't it, when you look at these things? Try to understand what it is in travel. All right. So let's get into hard line, close line, screen lines, adaptation, how to use the open and close. Direct lines of truth, line positional levels. Setting lines of box, circle, triangle, circle, and line position, right? Set core lines in 1 setting, 2 line rotations, and 3 travels in position of grounds. Set position lines of split lines anomaly in 2 panels, line rotation, surface, and traction. Triangulate with 3 lines of flux in position locations, circle line 1 cycle, 1 surface, 1 track location. Direct calculus and modification line screens, adaptations to face recognition. There's the eye, there's the nose, there's the chin, right? Has direct lines into flux over screen lines adaptations, calculate, modify. Triangulate line conditions, crossing symbols and line screen lines, adaptation lines of force. Track calculus lines of ground center interference of 1 cycle, 1 system, 1 travel, 1 direction, 1 time centers, 1 operation, 1 surface, 1 track location. All through direction, right? Getting to the modification of ground centers, all through the line rotation surface, opens all line communication setting and travel. Okay? Easy peasy lemon squeezy, isn't it? Once you understand what's going on, the modification. All right, so setting lines of core track interference. Let's go through open panels. We'll go through bracket lines of 0, and we're going to bring them together into block screens. This is a block screen. 1 center lines equal lines of track interference and direct signals. Okay? Setting lines, communication lines, high center interference, bringing it together out of singularities and automatically in binary position lines of programs. 3 center core system and singularity, 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 crossing line signals and set correlation. Setting lines of 3 weather patterns equals lines of flux into 3 line patterns into 0 correlation lines of traction. Direct lines, modification lines of 1 symbol, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, 1 calculation, modification setting. Process calculation lines of sonar in position of 4 track lines to your earth that opens the signals, line condition setting, and process. Direct lines into all of the detection screen lines of sonar and track location. This is a line signal. This is a sonar signal. This is the detection signal. Setting and calculation lines, high ground lines. Okay, high position locations, high center interference, high position program. Set position, set position, set position, and 4 circles. All right. Cross line signals, half pipe, cross line, half pipe, and track location. Direct line signals, truth, and line conditions of false. In position of truth, in position of truth. 3 or 4 line signals, right? 42 screen lines in 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 track location. Okay. Setting line communication lines, high center interference, high position of ground centers, line condition, high operation lines, calculation, screen line adaptation, hieroglyphics. Coming together line, high center location lines of 3 equals lines of core track and position location of center. This is all through the rain. This is all through rain that you see on a grid, that you see on a windowsill. This is what goes on in position of rain, and air, and water, and fire. Once you recognize the communication line direct signals, the earth line rotates its cycles, position lines of panels, and 3 track line provision. 4 track lines of platforms, set core track line calculation lines of 3 lines of 4 lines of 6 lines of line rotation, surface, and traction. Direct signals, modification lines of 2 sonars, position line of 4 sonars, over cross line connection to 3 line communication, high position location and setting. Process calculation lines, high direct location setting from the colors lines, security lines of 1, security lines of 2, security lines of 4, and track location. Open signals, open panel, track lines, high provision location, formation, and ground centers. F lines of 1, sets position lines of F lines of 2, set correlation lines into E, in position lines of all lines of S into escape. Travel point lines of graph into formation lines, setting lines of false narratives, one center, one surface, one traction, one division, one location, one calculation. Okay? Directing symbolism, line conditions and cross line symbols. High set correlation setting and travel lines are 3 graph communication lines of high setting. Process lines of 1 in position of 2, in position of 3, in position of 4, in position of 5, in position of 6, in position of 7, and track location. Direct lines of signals, modify the line centers of 1 center, 1 surface, 1 track location. Setting calculation lines on energetic line screen and direct signals and modification lines and temperature reading and screen lines and adaptation lines and causal coordinate setting and crop circles and track location to a system and travel. Done by equation. Very complicated stuff. All done through the ring. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Very complicated, isn't it, guys? To try to understand how this all works in provision lines of cycles. Okay? Okay, so let's get into data information lines, core track interference, and code factoring. The factorial line screen lines are the information lines of clouds. I lines is signals, location your E clouds, core track interference in your central clouds. Direct lines of clouds, set lines, communication lines of factor, reline conditions setting in resource centers and travel in position location to its factor reset position of its program. Direct signals, modification lines on one cycle, travel lines, point lines of graph, indicates graph communication setting position of its program. Directing signals, this is how you come into the iClouds location, the translucent line screen location of X-ray. Echo Zulu 1, Foxtrot 1, and position line of travel. That's a cloud. All right. Center core system lines, high center interference, X2000 line 1, X2000 line 2, X2000 lines 3, and track location setting. Process calculation line ground centers, opens all signals, ground lines of 1, docking lines of 2, and track location. Track calculus lines, ground lines, high center interference, formation lines, green lines, operation line cycles, reach track location lines of docking lines of 3, and track location. Direct lines, modification lines, X2000 scans, lines position location as scan centers, and line position of 3 centers. Process cross, line signals, line condition setting in 1 measure, 1 correlation lines of track location. That's my question. So this is what goes on when you guys go into sleep mode. Right? This is where the X2000s come out of the cloud lines. Directing modification line signals sets up sonar lines and track lines of 1 in position of 2 into 3 lines of panel and track locations. Direct lines and location grids and line setting. Process line, signal line, court center line, rotation, surface, and track location. This is what goes on in clouds. Cloud screens, cloud rotations, I clouds, E clouds, centric clouds. Directing modification lines of core center interference, half pipe line signals into modification line screens, adaptations that travels in modification lines of screen locations. Setting line communication, high center interference, flux over 1, flux over 2, energized line communication, setting and travel and communication. Done by equation. And that's just the 1 cloud screen, which is a solar net. Core track provision lines in 1 cycle sets lines of 3 track provision lines of sight lines. Direct calculation modify into plateau screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Process calculation lines of 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division location system and calculation. That's my equation. This is what goes on through energetic cloud screens and adaptation locations to your solar nets. Solar net, division net, core track interference, central line communication lines of webbing, line condition settings, ionospheres, correlation spheres, direct spheres, ultraspheres, track location spheres, galactic spheres, high core track interference, mega line communication spheres, high calculation lines, high track lines, high position location line condition, high center interference, high position of the program, direct location lines, high calculation modify, and line position location of 0. Done by equation. That's what goes on through clouds. iCloud screen direct lines, the cloud lines of track location lines of default lines of screen lines, adaptation lines of flux, flux over 1, flux over 2, schematics over line, high position over pi. Panel lines and D line centers of travel. Points lines of graph in 1, 2, and 4 set correlation lines of communications. Direct signals modification. Coordinate track interference and flux lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings of panels and travel. Direct axis lines, X2000 platform settings into 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface, and 1 track location, 1 setting. Process calculation lines of high center interference into modification lines of 1 cycle, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location. Cross line signals, position lines of tunnels, and line rotation surface. Process calculation of platforms, line conditions, high center interference of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, set course settings, and visual cortex of platforms and track location. Direct lines, high center interference in the sun and the moon, open signals, open panel, open communication lines, calculations, drag line, rotation surface into lines and position of face recognition and configuration. That's my equation. Directing lines of panels comes in all position locations, how you come into cloud line screens and direct signals. You have to know exactly what's going on. Line position location to your system. Go through recharge, remote, and line position location to your system. Skynets. Let's get in cloud line screens. Modification lines and cloud lines into membranes, core track interference line direct signals. Point lines as settings. Now, we interline correlations setting interdimensional lines of door lines. Core track interference to transdimensional direct signals and correlation lines of track interference and infusion location setting of travel. Setting communication lines of flux of 1 to position of travel lines across line signals. Process lines, signal lines of laser track location, high settings and travel. Points lines of graph communication lines to energetic line screens and lines of cosmos that interlines of correlation setting and communication in the system. There it is, the equation, right? All right, so go to the flux line screen, okay, in travel, okay? Now, it gets really interesting from this line settings to the membrane core track interference. Flux lines of 1, flux lines of 2, mystical cortex, and position lines of panels in a 1 cycle, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location. Process calculation lines of highest interference into particle system location of profile. There it is. Boom, face recognition. Time sequence lines of track interference, high direct signals, modification cycles, regenerate the communication lines, open all signals and modification lines of 2 lines, screen lines, adaptations, and position of yin and yang, process lines and configuration lines of phase. Based in this way, indirect signals and modification line 1 cycle, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, 1 system. Okay? Directing lines, calculation lines of ground centers, modificate the cycles, and regenerate the communication lines of flux lines and calculation lines of modification. Done by equation. Okay? So, getting communication what goes on with cloud line screens and calculation your Skynet, grid lines, screen lines, adaptation lines, highest interference. You have to use the lines of open sequence. Let's put this together into modification lines into rectangle screens. 1 signal flux into 0 correlation. And this is all done through rain. Okay, because rain is plasma, right? 4 generation lines, your 7 bodies of water is plasma generation lines of 4 settings. 1 setting cross line signals and 2 tractions, right? Direct lines into 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division of 4 set locations. Calculate and modify cross lines 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 location settings and travel. Points lines of graph, center core system 1, 2, 3 lines, 8 lines of set correlation lines of travel. Direct lines modification lines of 1 sonar, 1 track location. Direct oxygen lines and satellites, upline signal with high rotation surface and travel. Direct oxygen lines of 1 cycle, 1 circuit, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location to a system. Done by equation. All right. Satellite communicates downshift cross lines at 3 set locations of angle. Point lines of graph communicates lines of X line 1, setting position X lines 2. Calculation lines of X line 4 into D lines of X lines of 1. Set lines of 3 tractions, direct lines of 1, direct lines of 2, and direct lines of 3 and travel in position routers and routers and correlation setting track communications. That's it's all done through a cloud inside position location to its system and line connects to its setting and position location to its remote. That's all inside a cloud. Okay. So in that position, guys, everything comes in all lines of highest interference, how you get and direct and redirect your signals and how you come to your truth and your false narratives. All right. Truth line connection, highest interference. Let's go through 1 line of truth. Truth lines at theta, in line position at all levels of teleportation, travel point lines into telegraphing, right? So we got 2 panels crossing signals, right? Process lines crossing signals, right? Direct and redirect, right? Center core system opens up all levels of its hologram structure of design, okay? Now the symbolism comes in a 4-track division lines of cycles and generate the screen lines of solar graph communication at 3 cycles. Regenerate the security line and location grid. There's location grid. Center core system jump downshift cross line setting, process lines of center, half pipe line, open signals, open channel, open line communication setting into a unification line, screen line adaptations and a product line accelerator that sets a box frame communication line system and all levels of operation line service that opens all communication setting, direct and redirect location cycles and reline position travels that points lines of signal location to a system and communication. Done by equation. So we've got a T-line screen, T-line rotation, T-line surface, and T-track location to a system balance all through cloud, right? You have to understand what goes inside clouds now, all through direct signals and modification lines of screen lines. That's what goes on. Activity motion line sensor is a monitoring system and position lines of travel. Points lines of settings, there's a line communication to a system, right? Circuitry lines of cycles, line position, and line rotation, surface, and probing. Calculate, modify, in line position location settings, 1 position travels and 2 settings, process lines and inline rotation clocking system, process lines and 3 lines of center, 3 lines of surface, and 3 track location. Direct lines of signals, process lines of 1 in position of 2 into 3 lines of center. Process communicates lines of ground lines and pi generation. Cross line signals, process line communicates the center and communicates to its system. Very complicated stuff, but very powerful. All right, so center line division has a pi generation line screen. Process communications opens all signals in position lines of traction. So let's get through signals. One center, one surface, right? Process lines of clock lines, center lines of 0, lines of 1, 0 lines of 2, 0 lines of 3, 0 lines of 4, 0 lines of 6, 0 lines of 8, 0 lines of 9, and 0 lines of 10, 0 lines of 11. So you're going around in Fibonacci. And then you get position lines of 12 cycles in one center, one surface, one track location. Direct lines of modification lines, the XT1000 comes in a 2-line rotation, surface, and traction. Direct lines of modification lines of 0 lines of 8 and 3-line cycles, one center, one surface, one traction, one division, one location, one rainbow, one router, line condition, graph line communication, screen lines, laser track case lines of revision, sets lines of energetic pi, screen lines, adaptations, in flux over line conditions setting, all communicates to its system, and travel in point lines of graph and communication line of 45 angle, line rotation surface, and track communication to its system. Done by equation. Okay, very, very complicated stuff, guys. Very complicated stuff, right? But that's what you're coming into. All right, so point lines of graphs is a direct and redirect line cycles and line communication setting. Also in track application, this is all done through line communication Skynet. This is all done through a cloud. Everything's done through a cloud. You have to understand the activity, line screen line, highest interference. So where does your visionary cortex come from? The cloud itself. All right, setting communicates line. It's a centric course setting that puts lines of flux and line screen and lines of adaptation. Let's process lines of setting, lines of 0. Let's bring it down, line center location of 4 equals lines of 3. And that equals lines of 7 attraction, right? Direct lines of modification, 3 lines, set position of 2 track location. You have to get into travel now. So the lines of zeros and line conditions of numbers, shapes, and symbols. The activation line screen crosses line symbols in a 4-line rotation. Travel point lines of graph, sonar line 2, 6, 8, and 12 set correlation lines of traction. Direct lines, modification lines of symbolism, lines of film strip, and line rotation cycles, one center, one surface, one track location, one provision, one cycle. Okay? Setting communication lines, NXT line circle, and one surface, one track location. Direct lines, modification lines, one center, one surface, one set calculations, and one platform and track location. Process calculation lines of ground centers, cross line signals, and a 40-line setting of split lines of anomaly. Cross line signal, cross referencing in communication setting of 4-track provision. Cross calculated lines, energetic line screen adaptation lines of process. Direct lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4 set location of travel. Direct lines modification, location grid comes in a half-line signal, a half pipe, sets course centers, and a downshift cross-line signals and modification lines of screen. Direct line modification lines, one center, one surface, one traction, one particle line rotation surface and setting on standby. Direct lines of signals, 0 lines of 1, 0 lines of 2, 0 lines of 3, 0 lines of 4, and track location. Direct lines and setting, put lines of 7, puts lines of 7, puts lines of 7 at 3, 3, 3. Direct lines of 3 lines of 3 lines of 3 track location of 3 sevens and track location provision that opens all sight lines and high center interference and clove lines, screen lines, adaptation lines, and setting. Process calculation. Directing modification line in line condition solar sphere has a direct lines of panel. Now you add lines of high center interference, line position location, its calculations. So we go flux on screen and 3 lines of zeros and track location, right? Directing signals, right? Modification lines of pi, okay? Set core track interference, hydrocations, in position location, modification lines of pi. Calculation lines of console, navigation lines of core center interference, and position locations. And then we get into the line screen over cross line signals. Anything in a truth line sets position lines of travel, position lines of track location to its calculation. Direct lines, modification lines of one symbol, one traction, one division, and location to its system. Configuration of face recognition. Time sequence lines of setting, 3 line communication lines of 2 panels, 4 set correlation lines of travel, line rotation surface, line position of 0. Sets communication lines at ground center, line communicates to its system. Process calculation ground line service, line communicates to security line defense lines, highest position. Travel point lines of graph, communicates lines to center, sets position lines of high center interference of tubing, and rotations lines of surface. Sets core line and high calculation lines of XT1000, platitudes line division location travels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines of communication. Okay? Directing lines of signals, cross line high center interference next to the except line rotation cycle, sets lines of graph into 1, cross lines of 2, cross lines of 3, and travel. Points lines of graph, crop circle lines of high center, sets lines, communicates the center and communication. Direct line signals, modification lines of high center interference, and position lines of half line signal. Comes into modification lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8 lines of communication lines of setting. Process calculation line direction. Done by equation. Directing symbolism is all communication. And again, this is all done through a cloud. So now you understand every time you see clouds in line communication setting, it's position location of central and I and E clouds. Directing modification line setting is a CPU unit line screen. Let's go through CPU. Let's go through one equals lines of triangulation lines in percentage. Core track interference 100%. Equals lines. Let's calculate lines of high center interference and execute. Direct lines into plan. Now we plan this green lines adaptation to its platform. Set correlation lines of audio. Calculate modify in. Set position lines out and lines of flux in track location of 3 cycles. Setting direct signals into modification 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division. Calculate, modify, done. Right? Getting course lines and communication lines setting is an operation line as a surface, but it's all communicates through a system. Now we get into modifications, all right? So we go for the ground center line communication setting. Okay, flux over 1, flux over 2, flux over 3, and flux over 4, and track location of system and calculation. Direct lines, modification lines of center lines of 1, center lines of 2, center lines of 3 of docking. Process calculation ground centers. Operate the panels, operate the system, and travel. Sets communication lines of ground centers of 1, setting position of energetic dome screen and direct signals modification. Direct lines of platforms, cross line signals, line screen lines, adaptation lines of surface, and track location. Cross lines and the 45 split lines of anomaly. Track location line settings and line rotation, surface, and traction. Direct lines, high center interference platforms 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 6. Puts lines of 1, 2, and 3 track location of XC thousands and plateau. Process calculation lines of ground centers, opens all signals, down cross line, shift line. Let's go into bolding screens. 0 lines, and 0 lines at 3 track location. Direct lines of signals, cross lines of 1, 2, and 3 panels of communication. Process lines of 0 line, 1 rotor, 1 rotation surface, and XT1000, and travel into 45 split lines of anomaly. Travel point lines of graph at 3 cycles, line connects and high centers, cross line signals, in a 4 track location. Direct lines of platforms, direct lines of signal. Process lines of 1, position of 2, 3, 4, and 6, location of setting. Very complicated stuff, right? And it's all done through a cloud. When understanding direction signals, all I can issue SkyNet to sky grids, you have to understand how to modify the system location of laser, which retrack location. That's why you guys, every time you see rain, make sure you get into grids. Make sure you get into code factoring over E factors over code signal. Connection lines of Xbox, set quartz track lines of 1 cycle. X marks the spot in a rotation surface. Angle point lines of pi in generation. Correlates the high center interference into 0 course centers and the flux line communication screen lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 location setting. Process calculation lines of ground centers of 1, 2, 3 lines of 8 lines of rotation. Calculate lines into aligned position locations to dimension line scale, dimension line system, dimension line travel, in rotation setting, communicate to its system. Process calculation lines, tubing line cycles, 1 center, 1 surface, and 1 track location. Direct lines modification of 1 signal, 1 modification lines ground center location. Process lines of center, process lines of system, process line calculation, center operation. That my equation, all right? The center core system is all lines of travel. Once you understand how to use this in line communication setting, everything gets much easier in plateau. Position lines of tractions is a direct line high center interference, how you get into modification to a system all through travel. Calculate modify line communications, energize the communication lines of graphs. Now we go through grain graph communication lines into coding. Coding lines of 1. Let's code track lines of high center interference and line rotation surface into flux into 3 triangulation lines of split anomaly. Correlation lines of 1 X lines, high center interference, and equals lines of general settings and travel endpoint lines of graph. Get into copy, set lines of systematic lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings and travel. Points lines of 1, 2, cross lines of 3, and 4 set correlation lines of communication. Direct lines of 1, direct lines of signal, direct lines of communication center and calculation. Now my equation. All right. The center core system is a 4-line split line. It's a cross-line signals lines and cross-referencing signal. Process to calculate lines of coding system, line condition setting, DX lines of 1, DX lines of 2, DX lines of 3, back and forth in line rotation surface and track locations. Direct lines of signals, process calculates line, green lines of high center interference, all levels of operation signal location to its energetic line screen adaptation to a system that opens all communication lines to all lines to location to the cerebral and cortex line division location to its system. It opens all calculate modify in the brain frequency pattern line conditions setting to your cerebral, that cortex track location to its system, and all calculate modify in your constellation communication graph lines, your 12 foundation graph communications. It opens all say locations your 24, 48, 72, and 144 crystal grids and travel endpoint lines of graph communication lines. Have transdimensional space and track communication setting through operation. Done by equation. Very complicated stuff, isn't it? Try to understand what's going on, right? When you reach those levels, you start to redirect your signals and direct your location system, how it comes into all levels of the cerebellum. Process position lines of attractions is all direct signals into more communication setting through the next 1000 platform. Directing lines, modification line signals. Now, once you get in position lines of high track locations, every time you see the ring, and you see lines of signature line, screen location, truth and false narratives, you follow those signals in the next 2000 that come in frame, all right? Sets lines of 3 track locations, 1, and position lines of 2 track locations, direct signals, right? Primer circuits and setting of operation, right? Sets lines of 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and 4 settings, right? All right, sets lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 locations, right? Direct lines of sim lines of 4 lines of panels, process lines of high chord centers in position off calculations, ground center lines of truth false narratives, cross line signals, cross line symbols, cross line signals, cross line symbols, cross line signals, cross line symbols, and track location. I know it's complicated stuff, right? But once you understand that correlation setting, then you understand the mechanism where it comes into line position location to your megatronic cubes and line direct signals and modification. Travel lines of graph and communication lines of symbols, 4 track location lines of provision. Cross-line signals, line condition setting, cross-line signal line position location is a ground center line condition setting to your tubing. Process lines at high center interference, open all signals to energetic dome screen that puts lines of platforms in center core system and center calculation. Okay? Now, understanding the laser and understanding the direction is understanding solar graphs. And the solar graph communication lines of airline center core center energetic line communication of platforms and communications. Docking lines of 1, docking lines of 2. So we got 2 docking line system, MXC thousands and plateau and track location. Direct calculus line modification line, cross line signals, line position location of 3 lines of rotation surface of traction. Direct lines of 1 to position of 3 lines of rotation lines of traction. Direct lines of signals, XT 2000 comes in and line rotation surface. Process line, ground center lines of 1 signal, 1 rotation center, primer. Direct calculus modification into open signal, open panel, open clocking, line rotation, setting out position location to its high clouds and track location. All through a cloud. Everything is inside clouds, right? Symbolism lines of track calculation lines of screen lines adaptation is a high surface location setting, how you use your communication setting to your ionospheres. Direct lines modification lines of center. Sets communication lines open signal, open panel, open line rotation surface and track location. Set in O-line tractions and direct lines of symbolism, line settings on 1 surface, 1 track location. All right. Platforms of 1, platforms of 2, platforms of 3, platforms of 4, and track location. Right. Direct line symbolism, cross line signals, cross lines of platforms 1, 2, 3, and 4 setting calculation. Now we ground the centers of zeros. This is what happens when the ring graph comes into a level of your windowsill. Process lines of signals comes in, communication lines of process communicates to its system. Calculate and modify and align rotation surface and track location. In chronological order, right? Direct lines of symbolisms of 1 in position of 2 over 3 lines of 6 and over lines of 8 in panel. Process line settings of 1 in position 2 and 3 track location setting. Process line cross line signals into the lines of energetic line screen line adaptation lines of processing. Communication lines of ground centers of 0, process lines of 2, process lines of 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, 16, 24 in line rotation surface and track locations of the pi. Sets communication lines of ground center high interference. We had 0 lines of tractions in a 4-line cycle. Set position lines of 3 cycles. Set position of 7 in track location. Now we take the 7 line that routes the routers into a rotation spin cycle that routes the calculation lines of the I cloud, screen lines of E clouds, and line connection center cloud communications to its magnetic high information cycle. Sets lines of 3 lines of tether, inner and outer line rotation cycles of generation. Commit the ground centers high interference, electrical line, division line rotations, color the screens. Let's go into blue surface, truth lines of false, false lines of 1, false lines of 3, false lines of 4, and track location provision. Calculate and modify in green line cycles. Let's add green line cycles over tractions. Now this comes into truth lines of false, open and close, and line rotation, surface and track location. Direct lines of symbolism, position lines across those lines, security line. We have division lines of one cycle, one system, one position, one travel, in routes and routers and communication. Direct lines of symbolism, cross line signals. Modification of line screen, adaptation lines of surface. Now we take the blue lines, the green and the red, and center course system of travel. Points lines of setting. We allocate position time frame, one position of 3 and 4 set correlation setting of travel. Points lines of graph into one position line 4 setting location lines of travel. Direct calculus lines, we go into the green line cycles, over cross locations, overlapping, over sequence, over panel, overlapping, line communication setting, overhead, and track location. Direct lines of symbolism, we go into the red line cycle, which puts line security. Security lines of 1, security lines of 2, 2 lines of 3, 3 lines of 6, and track location. Direct lines of symbolism, line condition setting, process lines of 1, 2, 3, 6, 8, and 12 set correlation lines of protection. Right? Then we go into line calculations, over cross line signal, cancel that out. Sets lines of 4, track location lines of zeros, and line rotation, surface, and track location. Direct lines of high calculation, modification line of high interference, come into line position location of green. Green center course system, and inner line rotation cycles and track locations back to center. Operation system comes out through calculation. All through rain, all through a cloud. Okay? Very powerful stuff. Okay? So I'm getting you guys to understand how this all works. Now, if you want to change the plasma screen, you change the coloration lines of circles. That puts all can be fate. Let's go into gold line cycles, one center, one surface, one traction, one division location. Okay? Center core line, center, over traction, over division, over line rotation, surface, line position location calculations. Right? Done by question, right? Over lines of signals. All right. But very complicated stuff, guys. How this all works through rain, all through a windowsill. Raindrops are falling on my head. All right, rain graph calculation, screen lines, adaptation lines, and serve puts all communication in your system. Process calculation lines open all signal location in your settings. All right, so let's go through 22 track locations of center. I know you guys are very complicated now, trying to understand. We'll go through 41 split and equals lines of 1 and to indicate line screens, adaptation lines of flux and travel. Okay, process calculation lines of direction, arrow lines of point lines of graph and north, east, west, and south. Right, northeast, west, and south has no division locations of anything in north because your pi is modificate your system. That's basically putting you guys in the mass, the calculation of longitude, latitude now. Expansion over line screen adaptations to your evolving system and alter track location in your settings of provision. Okay, so we take the 42 line cycle, sets communication line centers in position, wait till we get to 50 lines of circles, lines of setting. Process line, getting that communication, waiting on signal, waiting on system, waiting on travel into energetic line screen. Direct lines of 5, direct lines of 0. Wait till it gets position. You're going to see set correlation lines of 5 tractions, 5 divisions, 5 locations, 5 centers, and line conditions of 0 in rotation surface and track location. Disappeared. Set position lines of center and rotation surface and traction. Okay? All right. Collecting system has 1 lines of 0, 0, 0. Now you can add lines of 13 tractions, sets lines of provision lines of 12 cycles, and communication of clocking. All right? Direct line symbolism. Now we take the 40 line 3, sets communication line equals line track interference of 20 lines of volume and 7 track lines, provision lines of set locations. Direct lines of modification lines of 1, 2, set lines, 1 line rotation, surf track location. Done by equation, right? All through a set calculation. Okay, very powerful stuff. I know everybody's going, whoa, this is way too much to understand. But if you understand clouds and what it goes through and line position locations, you understand what's going on and lines of 24 lines of signals, line position location of the system, how it all lines is calculated, lines of docking, what's inside a cloud is all through transit location to its position of patterns. Direct lines of modification, what goes on in tractions, is all modified how you see yourself located into your own skynets and your solar grids. Calculated, modified to the dimensional sail to a solar sail. Anything in that line communication setting puts everything in line communications in balance. All right, so we'll go through triangulation lines of trifactors. We had a trigonometry line screen adaptation lines of ground lines and geotherium. Sets core track interference lines of high center interference high position program. 3 lines of cycles, 2 lines of division, and 1 system. Okay. Split lines of 1 and position cross lines of 2. Okay. Center core system in 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, 1 calculation. All right. Now we had 2 line cycles, flux over line, flux over screen. Okay, very powerful stuff. The center core lines high interference, downshift cross lines and calculation to a setting. Oh my gosh, look at how powerful that is. Woo! All right, symbolism lines, signaling lines of 1 in position of 2 in position of 3 and track location, right? Cross lines, energetic line, green lines, high interference, into flux communication lines, the high calculation lines to offense and track location. Very powerful stuff, all through track location perspective. Perspective drawing is everything, guys. It modifies the system and explains why General took it for 8 years. Set lines of 1, set lines of 2, and track location, right? Process calculates lines of ground center line, position over signal, over pi, over traction, over division, location to a system. Process calculates line ground center high interference and tubing lines of 1, set correlates and high interference and travel endpoint lines of ground center communication. Direct lines of symbolism, open cross line signals, and the modification lines of high interference and temperature reading, line specification of sonar that puts all communication lines of balance. Position lines of tractions and direct signals into modification lines of tubing, in position location of zero ground centers, in line position open signal, in line connection setting through triangulation split lines of anomaly that opens up window doors, and line position of its pyramid that opens all track location and provision. Done by equation. Woo! All through cloud. See? Energetic lines of 1 in position of 2, in position of 3, in position of 4. Hoo-ah, all right? So understanding cross-referencing, direct and redirect, understand that through all levels of right over left and left over right, puts lines of platform line communication setting to platforms. Triangulate lines of blue and track locations. Blue, 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 blue. Okay? Now, this comes out. You can see it traveling out. Everything cancels out. Everything's on standby. Everything's on waiting set and position lines of travel communication setting position operation. But this is coming out. Everything's out, so it's not canceled out. So you balance the communications, how you bring in things through attraction, all through traction. Add line security, line defense, 3 lines of cycles, 3 lines of surface, and 3 track location of 3. Sets communication. I'm just communicating with 3 now. 2 is offline position. All right, they're not roguing, they're just offline, right? So I'm just connecting with 3 lines. If I overcross line connections, I set an overlines that overdraft that puts a line communication setting into overline signals. This is overline signals, a line position of 3 track location setting of travel. Communicate with this cancels out. You can't see this anymore. This is what you see. This is what I'm communicating with travel. Has a direct line signals on communications. Done by equation, all right? Center course setting is all lines of how you see yourself through perspective screen lines. Has a direct line signals and a panel core track centers. Now direct lines of symbols puts all communication lines of balance. Let's have a direct lines of flux, 3 triangulate line position of program, right? Set lines of 3 track case lines of primer. Direct lines of 1, direct lines of 2, and track locations. Angel traction setting. Angel. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? Platitudes on 1, set lines of platforms of communication system. Platform lines of 2, and 3 4-line rotation. Calculation lines over cross line signal and position. Operation lines of 1, operation 2, 6, and 8 travel communications. Direct lines of 1, cross lines of symbols and line setting. Process lines of platforms into a tubing system and position locates to its container and travel. Done by equation, right? So understanding this is all levels of what you come into and position of. Communicate with this or communicate with that, but everything cancels out when you're on signal. All right, very powerful stuff. So it's important you understand how to use the communication lines of perspective and line position locations and settings. Let's get into a box frame, box line 1 in setting, right? Set core lines of flux, 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 and flux, and arrows indicate line screen and high interference. We're going to go in position of south, 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 and south. Who said it has to be north, south, west, and east? It's all south, right? South is in center, south is in center, south is in center, south is in center. Okay, X marks the spot in rotation, line screen, adaptation lines of surface, and track location lines of clock location system at center operation. Done by equation, see? Look up our place, see? You can see it coming out through equation, right? Center course center is a bird's eye view looking down and travel. 1x8000 comes to platform. Center course system opens all signals, opens all setting, line rotation system, and travel communication. Done by equation. The center course system is line signaling. Now, understanding that through modifications, then you understand how to use that through a ring graph screen. Direct lines, modification lines, high interference. Let's go through the system. That's point lines of graph and position lines of travel. Point lines of settings, line communication system, what's actually inside a cloud and travel. Sets lines of graph into a mapping sequence and travel. Okay. Now, the energetic line screen opens all code weaving, code activation lines, and code configuration location setting, and code track locations. Direct signals. See the face? There's the eyes, there's the nose, there's the mouth, there's the cloud. right? Modification lines, but if you look over here, it's looking here, it's looking here, all at once. Travel point lines of graph looking forward. Set correlation lines looking in position of profile of track location, right? X2000 comes in platform, indirect signals. Cross-line signals opens all panel. Cross-line signal opens all signals, opens all position, open all communication setting, and travel communication to a system. All right. So process lines and direct signals into timestamp line screen. Direct lines calculate, modify in one center, one surface, one track location, all through cloud. Now, if you look really close, you can see the inner child and track location. Right? It's the inner child. See it? Look at that. I keep doing that and it keeps traveling too fast. Okay, inner child, right there, guys. Right in the center operation. Right through the realms of communication lines of travel. All right? This is all through an energetic cloud that you see outside. Outside is in, inside is out. Inside line rotations. Let's 3 spot lines and screen lines, adaptation lines of flux. Let's 3 triangulate line position of programs. Direct lines, modification lines of 1 into 1, 2, 3. Set triangulate line highest center interference of 1, 2, and 3 line position equals lines at highest center of binary. Line communicates high center locations into circle and 1 rotation surface and traction. Direct lines of 1, set lines of 2, set lines of 1, set lines of 3, set lines of 4, set lines of 6, 8, and 12 set correlations of travel. Overcross lines in symbolism, process lines into flux over docking lines of 3 track location. Direct lines of cycles, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 track location. Center core system, 1 setting, 1 operation to projection in all line communication with setting. Kaleidoscope communications. Process lines of 1, line rotation lines of 2, process lines of 3, set lines and line condition setting process. Direct calculus lines of high direct signals into 1 in position of 2, 3 line calculus setting, crop circle, line direct signals in position location of system. That by equation. All right. So you guys have to get into all lines of how to get into the center core system of a cloud screen, all through the inner child. All right, so it's very powerful where we're coming into all lines of communications, right? How everything set lines of solar graph communications. So the actual laser line is the calculations how you use your Skynet. Skynet provision lines has 1 cycle and lines on 1 inhibitor. That core track and interference line cycles line position of 24 lines. Set position of 48 frames, 72 computer frames into 144 equals the crystal grid, guys. Okay, crystal grid. All right, that's all it is. 24 lines of cycles and 2 panels, 48 lines of provision, 72 computer frames, and 144 in line rotation. Sets communicates lines of routes as routers and line position location setting through travel. Very powerful, isn't it? So understanding the planets in your position location is knowing how to set it up in symbolism, location attractions, and through platform of communication. Okay? So there's so many ways of looking at this through pi, guys. It's all through maths, right? You want to get modifications, how to generate your screen lines adaptations. Crossing line symbols. You start here, you don't end up here. You have to go through here to get to there. Okay? You're in the center operation of you that expands the system in all levels of operation and configuration of face recognition of setting. Okay? That's you in the center. This is you in position, the inner child, the imagination, right? But what gets bigger is the expansion in your mind of longitude and latitude and processing, right? Center core system opens all signals and modifications, indirect signals, right? So getting from here, you're already here, but you have to understand the process of here in position of presence of here and the future of you there, right? That's center core centers that comes into a split lines of anomaly that energize the communication lines in X2000 and travel. There it is in travel with communication. Direct and modification lines with 45 split lines of anomaly and a 3-line rotation surface and a solar sail that sets communication lines of travel and direction. Very complicated stuff, isn't it? It's all through 45 split lines of anomaly. Okay. Track to communication line setting, it's all over the you and center operational location and nothing. Nothing process your position location to its platform. So having direct signals is all lines of how you communicate to your system of processing. But it's all communication lines in your master files, unremovable files, get into defrag and fragmentation to its system. But it's all lines of communication setting to its general settings and track locations. Now we're done. So I hope you guys had fun with that. I know there's a lot going on right now in your minds, trying to figure out what's going on through all line communication lines of travel, all through cloud. Okay, what goes on inside a cloud? Okay? All right, track, visualize the cycles, redirect communication setting, broken through signals. We're going to go through the XT1000 plan online, the core track interference command centers, level C, lower deck. Level C, lower deck. See you in 5. Adios.